especially since the record low temperature for this day is in Nashville is -2, and as you well know, we learned last year, sometimes it does rain. So we have a beautiful day. My name is Ray Harvey. I've been a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans and of Camp Number 28 for 2 years. I'm the editor of our camp newspaper, The General Orders, and Commander Knight has asked me to be the Master of Ceremonies for this dedication. When I joined the camp, I immediately became familiar with Granbury's Lunette, mostly because Ross Massey talked about it at every meeting we ever had. Finally, I became convinced that the only way to keep that from continuing to happen was to join the Lunette Committee and get the improvements made and thereby get some peace and quiet at our camp meetings. And at the January meeting, we're going to test that theory. As you know, General Granbury's brigade was primarily made up of Texas men. I have a document here which came in by messenger this morning from the Texas Brigade, Sons of Confederate Veterans, and I'd like to read it to you. Dear Commander Knight and the members of the Joseph E. Johnson camp and distinguished guests, I very much regret that a prior commitment in Texas has prevented me from joining you today on this important occasion. The Texas Division has been quite excited about the Lunette project since we first learned of it from compatriot Ross Massey. Compatriot Massey and Commander Knight have done a great job of keeping us up to date on the project. Through your camp's hard work, we all have another outstanding location from which to learn of the war, the battles around Nashville, and of Granbury's Texas Brigade. On behalf of the Texas Division and myself, I would like to thank Commander Knight, Compatriot Massey, and all of the others who have made today's ceremony possible, and for the work you continue to do to make this site memorable for everyone. Your exemplary work has set a fine example for the rest of us and truly demonstrated your dedication to the cause and the mission of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. You have much to be proud of and to be congratulated for. I have enclosed a Texas Lone Star flag that was flown over the Alamo in San Antonio, reminiscent of an even earlier struggle for independence, and also I've provided a certificate of authenticity. Hope you'll be able to find an appropriate place to display it, if not at the Lunette, perhaps at another location. Again, congratulations for a job well done. You have the gratitude of all of the Texas Division. Confederately Stephen J. Lucas, Commander, Texas Division, Sons of Confederate Veterans. There is the flag.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are so proud that all of you could come today for this momentous occasion. I'm the president of the General Felix K. Zollicoffer chapter of the UDC. My name is Linda Massey. My husband is Ross Massey. I'm very proud of him. We're very proud to have co-sponsored the bus tour and the seminar this morning with the Joe Johnston camp, and we're very proud that they included us in this event today. I wanted to let y'all know a little bit about the UDC for the ladies in this group. The UDC is a historical organization. We promote education, benevolence. We try to take care of our veterans from all wars. We raise money for scholarships for children, and we're also in the process of raising money for a scholarship for women who would like to continue their education. Last year, my chapter donated over 1,000 books and magazines to the Veterans Hospital. We gave over $300 to the Children of the Confederacy. There is an organization for children up to the age of 16. They can join that group, and then from 16 on, they can join the United Daughters of the Confederacy if you have a Confederate ancestor. The UDC is an outgrowth of many local memorial and monument committees of the Confederate Home Associations. They were organized after the war between the states. Two statewide organizations came into existence in 1890. These, with the local groups and auxiliaries of Confederate Veterans Associations, united. After several changes of name, the organization became officially the United Daughters of the Confederacy. It was organized on September 10, 1894. Thus, the United Daughters of the Confederacy are, by this connection, the oldest patriotic organization in our country. The objectives of the organization are historical, educational, benevolent, memorial, and patriotic. Patriotic, to honor the memory of those who served and those who fell in the service of the Confederate States of America. The UDC is an international organization. We have chapters all over the country, and we have a chapter in France. My chapter was started in 1912, so we're one of the oldest chapters in Nashville. Nashville has an affiliation of 6 chapters. Right now, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Her name is Miss Donna Lucas. She is a 5th generation Texas, and she is now living in Tennessee. She lives in Gallatin with her husband, Randy Lucas, who is an attorney. They are both War Between the States reenactors. Donna is with Lady Soldiers Friends Society, and Randy portrays military and civilian events. I guess it's that like that. She is a graduate from the University of Texas, and she's a second-year law student at Nashville Law. She's a member of the Albert Sidney Johnston chapter number 125 in the Texas Division, and her Confederate ancestor who fought at Franklin and was at this site was William McDonald, and we're very proud to have Miss Donna Lucas today.
Thanks, Linda. I will try to be brief. I'm only a second-year law student, and we have not learned to bore people for longer than about 15 minutes. I think that will come later. When I come to gatherings such as this, and there's some sort of usually official dedication or monument or memorial being put up, people start talking, gathering afterwards, and inevitably the question is, how did you get interested in the war? Of course, we're Southerners here, so you don't have to say which war. We all know which war we're talking about, and we're mostly on the same page. For women that get interested in the war, lots of times they have come to it by genealogy research, or there's one in every family, and I'm it, and probably all of you are it too. You're the quiet child that sat there and absorbed all of this, who's related to who, and who knew who, and who on down to who was pastor when so-and-so got married at the Baptist church, and you didn't know you were doing this, but you were absorbing all of this so you could become the future person that sat there and told it to the next generations. And I paid no attention to my Southern heritage consciously growing up, but my grandmother and my great aunts in Austin, Texas were UDC members, and I learned early on, I would be handed the chapter roll and told to call the ladies for the meeting, and what the subject was, what to bring. And in Austin, in the State Cemetery, Albert Sidney Johnston is buried in a unique crypt. It's an above the ground with a full image of him in marble, encased in a glass display. And we would be routinely driven by there. There's Albert Sidney Johnston. Well, who's that? Well, you would be told who he was. And I didn't absorb this. I mean, I did absorb it, but I wasn't active about it until I moved to Nashville. In Texas, we don't have battlefields. For most people, the interest in the war starts with going to a place of significance, usually a battlefield. And like I said, for the women, it may have come to them through genealogy. For the men, it usually comes as part of war, armies, weaponry, shooting at somebody, and then the interest evolves down into the war between the states. But with me, it started with a place. I didn't know my ancestor fought at Franklin, but I moved to Nashville in 1992, and my mother came to visit from Texas. And she's the black sheep in the family. There are probably 5 generations of UDC members. My mother didn't join. She was in Children of the Confederacy. She never joined. She just could care less about all this. But we say, let's go out and see what this Franklin is. Let's see what this is all about. Let's go to Carnton. And so my mother and I, on a really much colder and damper and rainier, dreary day, toured Carton. And being from Texas with no battlefields, we all do know one thing, and the flag from the Alamo says it all. You go to the Alamo, and it's a place. You can see it, you can touch it, you can look at William Travis's ring that he was wearing, that's on display in a case there, and you get a sense of what it was by being at the place. And my mother and I at Carton were told about the generals dead on the porch. We saw the blood stains on the floor from the surgery upstairs. We felt suddenly that we had some sort of connection to this place. And this began my study of the war. About a year later, my sister came from Texas. I said, "You really need to go out to Carton," but I didn't say much more than that. She went out to Carton, had some of the same feelings. She hadn't been interested before either. And she went back to Texas and joined the UDC. And I subsequently joined the UDC. She started doing all the family research. She started going to the archives. And she called me up one day and she said, "Well, we had an ancestor, we had a McDonald that fought at Franklin and lived." And I emphasize the "and lived" part because he enlisted from Texas at age 21. His brother went with him. He was 17 or 18. They went through the war together as part of the 10th Texas, 10th and 15th Consolidated. His brother was killed at Tunnel Hill, about Missionary Ridge. This is where my husband usually chimes in and corrects all the historical details that I'm not really being correct on. Before that, he'd been at Camp Douglas prison. They didn't make it through Franklin, obviously, together, but he went on and served out the rest of the war and finally did receive a Confederate pension in 1906. You think about all of the icons, the Battle of Franklin, the Battle of Nashville, and certainly I've been to Franklin and Carter House and Carton so many times, but it never fails to make a large impression and never fails to move me that my personal, someone that blood runs in my veins, as you use the cliched term, but you feel the significance of that someone that actually may have eyewitnessed the things we have come to associate with Franklin, the terrible carnage, the family hiding in the basement at Carter House, the women at Carton being able to look out of the bedroom windows and see the terrible destruction of the battlefield, the sight of the dead generals and commanders. The pre-battle, perhaps, there's so many stories of the premonitions and the premonitions of death and the horrible destruction that it was to be, and this last great chance for the Confederacy. To be personally associated, related to, descended from someone that witnessed any of this momentous turning of history, to me, is very significant. In the UDC, sometimes we debate this lineage, this proof of lineage thing. Why should we require people to document their family history on back to their ancestor? And I used to sort of come down on the side of we really should just dispense with that. But then you look at something like my ancestors' pension application and the questions that they answered. What is your occupation, if you're able to engage in one? This is 1906. I used to be a carpenter, but I'm not able to work now. I am in very bad health. I have bronchial trouble. I am crippled with rheumatism. I can't get around at all. How long did you serve? I enlisted in March 1861 and served until the end of the war. And what property, the value thereof, have you sold or conveyed? What do you have? Nothing at all. What does your wife have? Real and personal, and what it is its value. She has nothing at all. Are you unable to labor to earn your support? I'm unable to. What income do you receive? I don't receive any except the help I get from friends. Statements from friends to attest that this is indeed William McDonald and he's applying for a pension. He was my messmate. We went through the war together. I know that he would never desert the Confederate Army. When you see that and you're personally connected with it, this changed my point of view about the lineage requirements, because as that pension attests, at the end of the war and for many years later, sometimes blood was all they had to give, both on the battlefield and through the blood of successive generations. For many, that is the only thing the Confederate soldier had left to give at the end of the war. And I must honor and respect that. I am deeply honored to be descended from a Confederate soldier, particularly one that saw such significant action in battle at one of probably the most significant place, I think, Franklin. And I just hope each and every one of you will honor your ancestor always and continue to support the Confederate history and heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lucas. Our next speaker, who will present a program entitled The Savage Struggle at Granbury's Lunette, is our own Cap 28 historian and chairman of the Granbury's Lunette Committee, Mr. Ross Massey.
All right, thank you. I grew up on the grounds of Belmead Plantation, and I started studying the battle, trying to figure out what happened in my yard. And as I tell people, I found out nothing happened in my yard, but I found out what happened in other people's yards. And as I got older, I never ceased to tire of trying to find where things happened. And I kept reading Stanley Horne's book, and I kept thinking about some of these places and wondering if they could still exist. And I believe it was 89, I found what is the far extreme left of the Confederate line, earthworks where the cavalry fought the U.S. Navy on the Cumberland River over across Charlotte. To my knowledge, no one had found it before. I found canister that the U.S. Navy was firing still on the ground. You don't need a metal detector, it's on the ground. And back in the 30s, I later learned that it was covering the ground. And then I started thinking about this Lunette. And I had the hardest time, if I remember, it was 3 or 4 trips up and down Polk Avenue and some of these side streets to try to find what's left here. And what's confusing, I'm going to get to in a moment, is there's another railroad cut here that's part of the confusion. But the strangest thing is how this all worked out. I brought a state archaeologist over here, and we had documented the other site, and then I brought him here to document this site. And they were in one of these absurdly long trucks that back then no one would think of taking their children to school in, but one of these monster state vehicles. And in order to turn this thing around, we went over through that stone gateway and down their driveway to Nashville Wire to turn around. And I was on the back seat, and the archaeologist started reading. And it was this sign, Lunette, extreme right of the Confederate line, and so on. And I could tell that he was looking out the window and reading. And I said, Fred, what are you reading? He said, that sign. So after all this work trying to locate these remains, this marker was across the street the whole time. It had been moved. It had originally apparently been here in the correct space, and how it ever got moved across the street, we don't know. But it was funny. These markers were put up in 1912. There were 20 of them, and the only other one that I've found is in Woodlawn Cemetery, of all places. So we approached Nashville Wire just a few weeks ago and asked them if they would give us this sign. I thought it'd be an easy thing to go over there and move it, but each of those blue posts weighs about 300 pounds, and after digging for about an hour, I realized that it was just too big a job for one person. So I got some of my friends here, and we came over here, and fortunately Sir William Doris back here had a lift gate on the back of his pickup truck, and he was able to come up, and we took a chain and lifted them out of the ground. We were never we had still been digging. But Nashville Wire was so nice to give us that sign. They didn't ask us for anything for it, but most of all, who we really appreciate is Ms. McCord back here in the red sweater, because she gave us this piece of property. And one of our camp's many fine attorneys, Bob Notestein, and he's somewhere here. Where are you, Bob? He's waving his hand back here. Bob figured out a way to keep us from having to deal with metro government, and rather than getting an actual deed, we got a permanent easement, and that way we didn't have to deal with their I almost said idiots. I caught myself. Their planning commission, and so we've got permanent possession of it now. And we also, all of this was free, and even the walking, the steps, the cross tie steps. I looked in the phone book under cross ties, and there was one of the businesses called Dixie Tie and Landscape. I think that's the one I'm calling. The man grew up on the Cold Harbor Gaines Mill battlefield in Richmond, and he always appreciated this sort of thing. And he said, "I'm just going to do that for you." And I didn't understand at the point I was talking to him, he was the owner. I said, "Well, no, you can't just do it. We want to pay you for it." He said, "Not if I say you can't." I said, "Well, who are you?" He said, "The owner." I said, "Okay." So this is about $1,000 worth of work. We have just been really blessed that we've had so much done for free, and we've had so much help. I can't name all the people from other SEV camps, like Gene Andrews over here in the blue jacket, out here doing landscaping for us, and it's just been remarkable that this has been saved. Now I'm going to try to explain this position to you. I'm confused. I wish I could tell you that I'm not confused, but I'm confused about it. If you all have looked at the map, if you're on the motor coach tour, you've certainly looked at the map. If not, I hope you know, most of the Confederate line is on the other side of that railroad cut. And that railroad cut behind you, if you haven't seen it, be sure you go and look at that railroad cut before you leave. That is the cut for the railroad that went to Chattanooga, and that was cut through in the 1850s. Why on earth would they want to come and put this little earth fort over here and have it isolated like this? And the best I can understand from what I've read is there's still at this point 8,000 to 10,000 U.S. troops down at Murfreesboro. And if you walk just over to that bridge, you can see Murfreesboro Pike in the distance. So I'm thinking that General Hood wanted to be able to cover it with artillery. He's afraid those troops could move this way. Wiley Sword's book, Embracing Angry Wind, postulates that Hood thought that the U.S. Army might move out of Nashville to try and unite with them, and he needed to be here. But what he's done now is he's put what's left of Granbury's brigade, 344 men. Their generals killed at Franklin. They're under a captain, if you've got this handout, Captain Brofton. In my opinion, I believe Thomas Cartwright here will verify, you cannot find better troops in the entire war. There are nobody that I would rather have in a battle supporting me than Granbury's men. I think these people that grew up in Texas, grew up in a hardier environment. Nashville had been settled for years. It was civilized. But you've got these people in Texas, and they grew up fighting Indians, and they were just a tougher troop. And if anybody could hold this, it was Granbury's 344 men. I started looking through numbers. I'm never good at coming up with numbers. They're hard to figure. And I started looking over it again this morning. I don't think you're going to believe what I'm going to tell you. But I've thought about this for years, and I've looked through the OR, and this is how many troops I think attacked them, up to 8,000. There was a colored brigade that moved in this direction, off to your right over here. They're moving this way. Coming straight up toward us is a brigade that's largely a white brigade. There's another brigade that's coming this direction. And I add up the numbers on these, 2,500, 891, 2,027. But add to that, there was another 1,947 in attached units. And I started looking through the OR and realizing some of those units were here. There's probably anywhere from 5,400 to 8,000 troops that are on this side of the railroad cut. And there's nobody over here but 344 men, and they held out. It is absolutely amazing. The U.S. troops, supposedly up to 100 of them, got within the Lunette. I hope you all got this handout. I have to admit to you that we don't know exactly what this Lunette looked like. We've given it a lot of thought. I can't tell you how many hours I've struggled trying to figure out what it looked like. And this diagram, I think, shows it as well as any. I think that the natural incline of the hill before that metal building was built was such that this was a hilltop. And you can see, I want you to see the other side of it before you leave. There's a ditch. And the U.S. troops described the ditch that was a barrier to attacking it on the outside. And I'm thinking that that was one of the ditches that surrounded it. And off in the distance, there's a rifle pit farther down the hill. And they described the rifle pits. I think this is as good an impression as anything we're going to create of what this position looked like. This attack was a total failure, all the more remarkable when you consider the numbers the U.S. troops brought to bear here. Their own reports, the U.S. officers' own reports, admit what a failure it was. Grosvenor, who directly attacked it, I'm reading from his report, he said, "With but few honorable exceptions, the troops behaved in the most cowardly and disgraceful manner. The enemy, seeing the men hesitating and wavering, fired a heavy volley and stampeded the whole line. In vain the officers tried to rally the men. In vain the old soldiers rushed forward themselves. The line broke and nearly all the men fled from the field." General Cheatham himself is said to have been here. General Cheatham commanded this whole right into the Confederate line. He was from Nashville. He had the men hold their fire to the last moment. Some of the U.S. colored troops that were attacking over here were stopped by the railroad cut. And I have to wonder, if the U.S. Army had occupied this area since 1862, didn't they know the railroad cut was there? Didn't they know where they were sending them? It's something to think about, because when the troops got just about 100 yards off this way, they came to that cut, and what was across it was Confederate artillery firing in their face. And they broke back and ran. But there were also some that got across the cut. And we know that from stories in Confederate Veteran. The troops that were over about where the McDonald's is on Owensville Pike were in trenches over that way. Those lines had been built expecting an attack to come out of Nashville, but when they saw through the fog this massive brigade of troops coming, they let them come on. And all they did was a reverse in their trench and fired at them. At the same time, this other brigade, Govan's, swung across the mouth of the cut, and many of these troops began jumping in the cut, resulting in their deaths. The most peculiar thing out of all of this is some of the propaganda that's in the paper. Just this week in the city paper was a quote that the troops that fought here saved Nashville. The U.S. colored troops that fought here saved Nashville. This is so peculiar. You can see Fort Negley. It's on that hill. And you can see Fort Morgan. And they did have part, certainly, in constructing these positions. They were certainly in this battle, but it serves no purpose to say that. Do you know that the guns at Fort Negley were also pointed toward Nashville? They weren't just pointed this way, they were pointed toward Nashville. You cannot say that they were saving Nashville. The people in Nashville wanted to be free of the U.S. Army. And I've read other things. Several years back in something called the Nashville Eye, it said they attacked in wave after wave near the railroad until the rebels broke and fell back. The Confederates held this position into the night, and they didn't know it was evacuated until the next morning. And that's because the other end of the line out near Hillsborough Pike had fallen. I've talked longer than I meant to. I want to mention one other thing to you all. Our SCV camp has opened up Confederate Memorial Hall at Mount Olivet Cemetery, which is just about a mile away on Lebanon Pike. And I want to invite you all to go by and visit it anytime. It's supposed to be open every day. If it's not, go into the office and complain. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate those comments. Our next speaker comes to us from the Carter House in Franklin, Tennessee. He's the historian there. He's going to give us our keynote address. Mr. Thomas Cartwright will speak on Hiram Granbury's Texas Brigade. Mr. Cartwright?
It's my pleasure and honor and privilege to be here for you this afternoon in honor of who Pat Claiborne called the Noble Texans. He also called them a band of heroes. At the beginning of the war in Texas, there was a saying for Texans that a Texan will not walk 1 yard unless he has to. So in essence, they had a difficult time raising infantry troops in Texas because they all wanted to become cavalry. And they would allow them to become cavalry and then quickly in time dismount them. So in essence, you'll see many of the 24th Texas Dismounted Cavalry, 25th Texas Dismounted Cavalry. And I don't know if they were too happy with that, those Texans. But on a very personal note, I have the honor to be an honorary citizen of Texas and of Claiborne and Granbury, Texas. And Granbury's Texas Brigade, as I've already noted, were called a band of heroes. Churchill's Brigade was organized with the 6th Texas, 10th Texas, 15th Texas Infantry, and the 17th, 18th, 24th, and 25th Texas Dismounted Cavalry, along with the 19th and 24th Arkansas. And they were sent in September to a place called Arkansas Post, or Fort Hindman, I believe September 19th of 1862. And on January 11th of 1863, McClernand's division, Federal, about 30,000, along with the gunboats, came down, and after a sharp fight, no one knows who, but someone raised the white flag, or the white shirt as they called it, and they were very upset over it, the Texans, but the fort was surrendered. The officers of the Texas Brigade, Granbury was not there at the time, they were sent to Camp Chase, Ohio, and the infantry or the troops were sent to, I believe, Camp Douglas, but in Illinois. What is General Granbury doing at the time? Let's backtrack just a moment. He was born in Copiah County, Mississippi on March 1st of 1831. He attended Oakland's College at Rodney, Mississippi. Moved to Sanguin, I believe you pronounce it that way, Sanguin, Texas. Didn't like Sanguin, moved to Waco, Texas. And studied law, became a lawyer. Married a Miss Fanny Hines, I believe in 1859. War began. He was elected major of the 7th Texas Infantry. And they were captured at Fort Donelson. And from there they were sent to prison, of course released in time. And of course the 7th Texas fought and exchanged at Vicksburg. And the 7th Texas earned a great deal of honors at the Battle of Raymond, Mississippi, in the Vicksburg campaign of '63. Back to the other Texans, they were sent from Camp Chase in Illinois to Point Lookout, Virginia, where they were exchanged and sent to General Braxton Bragg's Army of Tennessee in the Tullahoma area in the spring of '63. No division commander wanted the Texans because they had surrendered. The only division commander who wanted them was Major General Patrick Claiborne. As Captain Samuel Foster would write in his diary that when they arrived to the Army of Tennessee, the soldiers were making fun of them. Okay, boys, we're going to pop a cap now. Don't pull off your shirt. It's not going to hurt you. Oh, do you have a shirt on? Because we want you to raise your shirt if the Yankees come. And but only Claiborne would take them. And as Ross correctly noted, in time they would earn the title was some of the shock troops in the Army of Tennessee, and arguably the best brigade in the Army of Tennessee. I state arguably only because I don't think it's fair to say they are the best, because as Mr. Hardy knows, Cockrell's Missouri Brigade, one of the finest, and Manny's Tennesseans, and Sharp's High Pressure Brigade, Mississippians, and Quarles Tennesseans, and Govan's Arkansans, and Larry's Mississippians and Alabamians. So many, 7 or 8, 9, 10, 11 of them were one of the best. But arguably Granbury's one of the best, and I couldn't ask for anyone any better than Granbury's to be by me. From there, of course, they fight the Tullahoma campaign, withdrawing toward Chattanooga, where Chattanooga, they withdrew. The Confederate Army of Tennessee withdrew from Chattanooga on September 8th of 1863, down into North Georgia. Churchill was soon sent to the Trans-Mississippi, and James Deschler commanded the Texas Brigade. And in time, the 19th and 24th Arkansas was sent to Govan's Polk's Brigade at that time, and they acquired the 7th Texas, Granbury's, right after Chickamauga. The bloody Battle of Chickamauga, where Deschler took that, I believe, a parrot shell right through the chest, the end of that first day of fighting, where Claiborne's drives the Federals back a mile and a half in the nighttime fighting. Deschler's killed. Granbury was placed in command, temporary command of the brigade. James Smith was. And James Smith, after Chickamauga, went into Chattanooga. We have the Battle of Chattanooga. James Smith was wounded there, and Granbury was placed in command of the brigade. And on November 25th of 1863, at Missionary Ridge, on the Confederate right, Claiborne's division, about 4,500 with the gallant Texans, they held against Sherman's hordes. Approximately, they had about 15,000 men, 6 divisions, attacking about 4,500 of Claiborne's, along with Manny's Tennesseans and Cummings, 2 regiments, 1 regiment of Cummings' Georgia Brigade. About 5,500 men or so holding off 15,000. Sherman lost 7 battle flags, 6 generals killed and wounded, and over 1,300 casualties. And now, I know some of you know this, on the right at Missionary Ridge, guess what the title of that area is called today? Sherman's Reservation. Sherman had his teeth kicked in there, and is, to my knowledge, the shortest report of the war. We attacked. We fell back. We went into camp. I bet I would write that too if I had my teeth kicked in like that. Should be called Claiborne's Reservation, obviously. And of course the center was pierced. Claiborne's with the Texans were the rear guard, along with Gist Brigade, Gist temporary division commander, holding the Federals off, withdrawn over Red House Ford to the Chickamauga Creek, where Braxton Bragg sent a courier to Pat Claiborne, saying that the gap, Ringo Gap, must be held if you lose your whole division to save the wagons and trains. And a wonderful, excellent example of defensive fighting at Ringo Gap, where they held off Joe Hooker, fighting Joe Hooker's 15 to 20,000 men, 4,500 of Claiborne's. Wonderful defensive fighting, where they positioned the troops where they could move backwards to your left or right, whatever area threatened. Had the artillery, 2 guns of Gothwaite's, section of Gothwaite's battery, with brush arbors screening them. And as one soldier said, when the Federals came close, they pulled out the brush, and Claiborne jumped in the air, slapped his knee, and said, "Give 'em to him, Lieutenant, now!" And blasted the Federals, shredding them, falling back. Repeated attacks. I might add, I believe it's Crichton's command. Federals from the east were coming to the west, and they were going to teach the Westerners how to fight. They didn't know they were coming up against Claiborne's and the Texans, and suffered severe casualties. And finally, Claiborne's ordered withdrawal, save the army and trains. And there they went into camp at Dalton, Georgia, from January until May of 1863. In March of 1864 and 64, I might add, was one of the last really amusing, fun times of the war for the troops, and the fact that it was the greatest snowball battle in the history of the world. About 10,000 Confederates throwing snowballs at each other. The General Cheatham was out there, General Claiborne was out there, of course the Texans as well. As Sam Watkins of Company H, 1st Tennessee, noted, that the mean boys would put rocks in their snowballs. Claiborne was captured, I might add, by his troops. They placed him on parole. He broke his parole. They captured him again, was going to dunk him in the creek. And he said, "This is the first time I ever lied to you boys. First time." Of course, in really April and in May started the Atlanta campaign of 1864, and a little-known battle called Pickett's Mill, where again the Texans held off the Federals and then counterattacked them, inflicting severe casualties on Hazen's brigade, O. Howard's corps. And after the Battle of Pickett's Mill, who, by the way, Sherman did not write one word about Pickett's Mill, not one word, completely omitted, completely. General Joseph E. Johnston, who I love a great deal, old Joe, he came up to the Texans and he said, "From this day on, this brigade will not be called Granbury's Texas Brigade. It will be called Johnston's Texas Brigade," which is a great honor from old Joe Johnston. Of course, the Atlanta campaign, fighting all those terrible battles, Resaca and on up to Kennesaw Mountain, where they inflicted terrible casualties. Dead angle, of course, to the left where Cheatham's is holding, and then, of course, Claiborne's division is holding, inflicting severe casualties on the Federals. During that fighting at Kennesaw Mountain, Lieutenant Colonel Martin, I believe, he stood on the works, waved a handkerchief or a shirt as a truce, and told the Federals were being burned alive, the wounded being burned alive. He says, "Hold your fire, boys, we'll hold ours. Let's help your wounded." And they assisted the Federals in saving their wounded. And a colonel in the 31st Indiana came up to this Lieutenant Colonel Martin, pulled out a brace of pistols, and said, "If you have 1,000 victories, none will be better than this one," and handed the pistols to him. No doubt Claiborne gave him permission or ordered him to do that. The severe battles in Atlanta, Peachtree Creek, battles of Atlanta, where Federal General McPherson was killed. And to this day is an argument on who killed McPherson. One says the Texans killed him, Captain Foster, I believe. And, of course, the 5th Confederate Irish Regiment out of Memphis, Tennessee, Coleman. They feel Coleman killed him. And I might add, with this Granbury's Texas Brigade, there was one regiment after Polk was wounded, Lucius Polk, who, as I've told by Mr. Earl, Skip Earl here, that this road is named for General Lucius Polk. As far as I'm concerned, that's good enough for me. The 5th Confederate, all Irish immigrants out of Memphis, Tennessee. And as one colonel said of the 5th Confederate, he said they were the most rascally set of men that ever went unhung. But true as steel in battle, always ready for a fight. Sometimes they fought themselves more than the Yankees. I might add, they would smuggle whiskey in their watermelons, their pumpkins, and their rifle barrels. Claiborne loved them, and they loved Claiborne. But even he said they gave him some problems. And I might add, on a little lighter note for a moment, the Kentucky campaign of 1862, barrels of whiskey were captured. Claiborne, who did not drink, he said one glass of wine affected his chess game, but his lads did, obviously. He placed a lieutenant in guard, asked a lieutenant, ordered a lieutenant, place a guard over the whiskey. Well, who arrives on the field but the 5th Confederate? He had a bad feeling. Bad feeling. He personally went to inspect the barrels of whiskey. Who had volunteered to guard the whiskey but the 5th Confederate? As he said, the barrels were empty and the guards were full. He had him arrested, as he should have, and he told the lieutenant, "I thought you had enough sense, Lieutenant, never to place Irishmen in guard of whiskey." Of course, those severe battles around Atlanta, Jonesboro, on August 30th and 31st of 1864. The 30th, if I'm correct on these dates, the 30th, the Confederates are attacking, and on the last day of August, 6 corps, Federal corps, against 1 corps, Hardee's Corps, where almost all of Govan's brigade were captured. A few that made it out came to the Texans and asked them if they had lost faith in the Texans. And they said, no, you didn't. You fought to the end. During that battle, General Hardee thought the Texans were withdrawing, and he came up to him. He says, "Are you retreating?" And General Granbury, very, very angry, said, "We never take a backward step unless ordered to do so." Of course, Atlanta falls September 1st of 64. Hood and the Army of Tennessee evacuates Atlanta to Lovejoy Station and then to Palmetto, Georgia, where on the night of October 4th of 1864, warm evening, Claiborne's division, and no doubt the Texans, marched up to Claiborne's headquarters, serenades the general. They asked him to speak. He told them how tough this campaign would be, what would be won if they're victorious, lost if they're defeated. He compared their lot to Ireland's under English rule, and he said their fate would be much worse if they lost. And they said he looked up into the starry sky with all the emotion in his heart, and he said that if this cause that is so dear to my heart is doomed to fail, I pray heaven may let me fall with it, with my face toward the enemy, and my arm battling for that which I know is to be right. And of course, his wish was granted about 2.5 months later. During that time, moving forward through Georgia, they had arms stacked, and lightning, a big storm came along, and lightning struck the muskets, the rifles, and killed one man and knocked Captain Samuel Foster, among many, knocked him 8 to 10 feet away and killed one. They had to pour water on another one. They thought that would help the man as well. As we all know, in time, the Army of Tennessee trying to pull the barbarian Sherman, that's my opinion, back through North Georgia, all the way into Galesville, Alabama, where finally the two armies turn their backs on each other. Sherman moves back into Atlanta, formulating his plans for the march to the sea, bringing warm women and children. And Hood's focus is Nashville. As they move forward, and on November 19th of 1864, they cross the Tennessee River, and on November 21st of 64, they march into Tennessee. There's a crude sign on the road made by citizens that said, "Tennessee, a grave or a free home." And this would prove more than true in the days and weeks to follow. They drive the Federals back from Waynesboro, Pulaski, Lawrenceburg to Columbia, Tennessee, where on November 24th and November 28th, the two armies glare at each other. And on the 29th, the Hood orders Frank Cheatham's Corps and A.P. Stewart's Corps eastward on a 23-mile flankward march, should have been 18, bad maps, leaving S.D. Lee's Corps at the river as a strong demonstration, the Duck River. And they move on up to Spring Hill on the 29th of November at 3:30 p.m. Claiborne's division, the vanguard. Mark P. Lowry's brigade at the front. They crossed the Rutherford Creek. Words had occurred between General Granbury and Hood on this march. Something to the effect about not moving quick enough, possibly. It irritated General Granbury a great deal. Of course, they drive the Federals, Luther Bradley's brigade, off the hill at Spring Hill, drive them across the road. The attack is halted. The whole Corps, Cheatham's to attack it that evening at 5:30 p.m. It didn't happen. A long, long story why. That's too long to go into now. But maybe Claiborne said it the best when General Brown, John C. Brown, asked who was responsible for the debacle at Spring Hill. Claiborne said, of course, it is the commander-in-chief who is aware of all the movements on the field. And it was Hood's fault. Of course, the Federals withdraw to Franklin. Confederates follow that morning. And on that day that we all live every day of our lives, November 30th, at 4 p.m., 20,000 brave, gallant Confederate heroes, 20,000 Confederate soldiers, 18 brigades, 100 Confederate regiments, 100 battle flags flying. They marched down the slopes of immortality. And about 80 yards from the Carter cotton gin and the gut of the battlefield, General H.B. Granbury's last words, the 6'5" Lord knows what he weighs at this time, but probably 145 pounds. General H.B. Granbury's last words at Franklin were, "Forward, men forward, never let it be said Texans lag in the fight." and then took it right here. I always thought that was to encourage the men, and I'm sure it was, but also that was a reply to General Hood on November 29th as well. They went in to fight at Franklin with about 1,100 muskets, rifles, and left with about at max 460, probably less. And of course the Federals withdraw that night, early morning, into Nashville. The Confederates follow. And as you well know, Granbury's Texas Brigade, named for General Granbury of the Lunette, where they inflicted severe casualties on the Federals. And then on December 16th, Granbury's brigade, commanded by E.T. Broington, I believe that's how you pronounce it, was overwhelmed Peach Orchard Hill, with Govan's and others, and Lowry's by Shies Hill. Confederate left crushed, start this withdrawal, hard fighting at the Battle of the Barricades, Granny White Pike, Holly Tree Gap, north of Franklin at the Harpeth River. The Confederates holding the Union trench line at Franklin on December 17th. And then at Winstead Hill, the West Harpeth, to Spring Hill all the way to Tupelo, Mississippi, where on January 23rd, 1865, General John Bell Hood resigns command. And he would wire Richmond that he left this army in better spirits than when he took it over. He took it over with 55,000, he left with 14,000 effectives. As General Beauregard, P.G.T. Beauregard said, if the army was not, if it was not a mob, it certainly was not an army. They were an army, and what was left of them, and the remnants were sent to North Carolina, where General Joseph E. Johnson said, once again, the Army of Tennessee has dispelled the slander placed upon them, which was John Bell Hood. And on April 26th of 65, the Army of Tennessee surrenders, and Captain Samuel Foster, along with the Texans, they start walking. No riding, no trains. They start walking home. Their long, long walk to Texas. Hood's Texas Brigade, of course, is very famous for their exploits in Virginia. In closing their exploits in Virginia at Gaines Mill, Second Manassas, Antietam, Gettysburg. But Granbury's Texas Brigade, who very few know about in Texas, although his name for General Granbury, until recently, now it's changing. I think Granbury's Texas Brigade deserves an equal place right by Hood's Texas Brigade as well. And they did not die in vain. They died for our cause, and they died for us. And I thank God in heaven that I'm so blessed to have such heroes like our brave Confederate soldiers that fought for a cause they knew was right, and that we know was right. God bless our gallant Confederate heroes, and God bless those gallant Texans that more than made a name for themselves on December 15th of 1864. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. I have one other person up here I would like to introduce. Came down for this dedication from the National Sons of Confederate Veterans, Dr. Pat Hardy, our Adjutant-in-Chief.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to all of our speakers for your fine presentations. I'd also like to thank again the Zollicoffer chapter of the UDC, the members of the Dillard Judd Camp for what they're about to do, Paula McCord of McCord Crane Company for the historical easement on the Lunette, Dixie Tie Company for the walkway and steps, Nashville Wire Products for donating the 1912 historical marker. Most of all, Commander Knight and I would like to thank the members of the Granbury's Lunette Committee who worked many hours clearing brush from the Lunette, collecting many bags of trash, shoveling 12 tons of gravel, digging fence post holes, seeding and nurturing our crop of grass, and generally made the Lunette presentable and made this dedication a reality. Some of them are Ross Massey, Henry Hood, William Doris, Jerry Raymer, Norm Reagan, Bill McCarty, Remo Serco, Skip Earl, Gene Andrews, Dick Knight. I want to thank him for extending us credit when we didn't have enough money to do it. I want to thank Bob Watson for paying the bills when we asked him to, and I want to thank my wife for putting up with me. Now, after this final event, there are some refreshments over here, and the proceedings will be concluded after this event. Gentlemen, batteries released.
If you're on the motor coach tour, I want you to see the ditch on the other side. Walk down the walkway and look at that before we get back on the bus, because we're going to need to go in just a minute. And also, if anybody's interested, we'll be on Shies Hill tomorrow evening about 4 o'clock. It's nothing organized. It's just a remembrance. Thank you.
Oh yeah, man. My brother calls it the Prague on the Cumberland.
That's funny.
Well, you know, you can understand why.